July 28, 1943. The skies over Sicily trembled beneath the roar of aircraft engines as Lieutenant Charles Dryden climbed to 24,000 feet in his P-40 Warhawk. His squadron, part of the all-Negro 332nd Fighter Group, had been assigned to escort B-25 bombers targeting enemy positions near Palermo. The German pilots who spotted their distinctive red-painted tails smirked over their radios. American commanders had sent colored boys to fight the Luftwaffe's elite. This would be like shooting fish in a barrel. Within the next 6 months, those same German pilots would learn a brutal lesson about underestimating their enemy. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable story of how racial prejudice nearly crippled America's air power during World War II, and how a group of extraordinary men overcame not just the German Luftwaffe, but also their own military's systematic discrimination to become one of the most successful fighter groups in the European theater. The United States Army Air Forces had a problem in 1940. With war raging in Europe and tensions rising in the Pacific, military planners were anticipating an urgent need for combat pilots. Yet despite this demand, the USAF maintained a strict policy that prohibited Black Americans from becoming military pilots. This stance wasn't merely traditional. It was justified by an official War Department study that concluded Negroes lacked the intelligence, reflexes, and courage needed for combat flying. Colonel Harold Houston, a senior training officer at Maxwell Field in Alabama, expressed the majority view when he stated in a December 1940 memo, "The Negro lacks the reflexes and spatial awareness required for modern aerial combat. Furthermore, he simply doesn't possess the technical aptitude to maintain sophisticated aircraft." That's simply scientific fact. Houston's scientific fact had never actually been tested because no Black American had ever been given the opportunity to prove otherwise. But that was about to change, due largely to political pressure on President Roosevelt from civil rights organizations and the Black press, particularly the influential Pittsburgh Courier, which launched the Double V campaign, victory over fascism abroad and racism at home. On January 16, 1941, the War Department announced the formation of an all-Negro pursuit squadron to be trained at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama. The 99th Pursuit Squadron would become the first Black flying unit in American military history. The program was widely expected to fail. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., a West Point graduate and one of the few Black officers in the Army, was selected to command the new unit. Davis had endured 4 years at West Point without a single roommate or friend, as his white classmates enforced a strict policy of silencing, never speaking to him except for official business. That experience had forged in him an iron determination that would serve the Tuskegee Project well. When I arrived at Tuskegee in March 1941, Davis would later write in his autobiography, "I understood that this program was an experiment that many wanted to see fail. Our performance would be scrutinized at every turn, and any failure would be magnified tenfold compared to white units. We simply could not afford to fail, not for ourselves, but for those who would come after us." The first class of cadets arrived at Tuskegee that summer. Among them was Coleman Young, who would later become mayor of Detroit, and George Roberts, who had previously taken civilian flight training. The requirements for admission were stringent, much more demanding than those for white cadets at other training fields. Candidates needed a college degree or at least 2 years of college credits, plus passing scores on a battery of tests designed to measure intelligence, spatial reasoning, physical fitness, and advanced technical aptitude. Of the initial 13 cadets, only 5 would graduate on March 7, 1942, as the first Black military pilots in U.S. history. The graduation ceremony was covered by the Black press nationwide, with the Chicago Defender calling it a triumph over prejudice and discrimination. Lieutenant Edward Gleed, one of the early graduates, recalled the pressure in a letter to his family. "We know we're carrying the hopes of an entire race on our shoulders. Every flight, every mission, we have to be perfect because they're just waiting for us to fail." The 99th Pursuit Squadron spent nearly a year in additional intensive training, far longer than comparable white units. Military leadership kept finding reasons to delay their deployment overseas, questioning their readiness despite training reports showing proficiency equal to or exceeding that of white squadrons. Finally, in April 1943, the 99th Pursuit Squadron, now commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., was deployed to North Africa, where they were assigned to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William Momeyer, a veteran combat commander who made no secret of his skepticism about black pilots. The squadron's first combat mission on June 2, 1943, was uneventful, a harbor patrol over the Mediterranean that encountered no enemy aircraft. The pilots performed well, but Colonel Momeyer's reports to headquarters continued to express doubts about their abilities. When the squadron failed to score any air-to-air victories in their first weeks of combat, Momeyer wrote a scathing report recommending the 99th be removed from combat operations and relegated to coastal patrol duties. The Negro pilot cannot think fast enough to fight in a first-class combat organization, Momeyer concluded. What Momeyer failed to mention was that the 99th was consistently being assigned the least desirable missions, often ground attack sorties or coastal patrols where they were unlikely to encounter enemy fighters. When Lieutenant Clarence Jameson pointed this out to his squadron commander, he was told, "That's not your concern. Just fly what you're assigned." The War Department was on the verge of using Momeyer's report as justification to end the experiment, when the squadron suddenly found itself in the midst of a major air battle over the Sicilian town of Licata on July 2, 1943. 8 P-40s of the 99th, led by Captain Charles Hall, were escorting a flight of bombers when they were jumped by a dozen Focke-Wulf 190s, Germany's most formidable fighter at the time. Instead of breaking formation as the Germans expected, the Tuskegee pilots tightened their escort pattern around the bombers. Captain Hall spotted a FW-190 diving on one of the bombers and turned to intercept. The German pilot, Oberfeldwebel Karl-Heinz Müller of Jagerschwader 53, later reported that he was surprised by the Americans' aggression. "I expected him to break off when I pressed my attack," Müller stated in his after-action report. "Instead, he came straight at me. I had to abandon my run on the bomber." In the swirling dogfight that followed, Captain Hall maneuvered behind Müller's aircraft and fired a burst from his 6.50 caliber machine guns. The German fighter burst into flames and spiraled into the sea, marking the first confirmed kill for the Tuskegee Airmen and a pivotal moment in aviation history. When news reached Tuskegee, the entire base erupted in celebration. First Lieutenant Walter Palmer recalled, "We knew what it meant. Captain Hall hadn't just shot down an enemy plane. He'd shot down an entire ideology that claimed we couldn't fight." The 99th continued operations over Sicily and then mainland Italy as the Allied campaign progressed. In January 1944, they were joined by the 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons, all Tuskegee trained units that together with the 99th formed the 332nd Fighter Group under Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr.'s command. Unlike many fighter groups whose pilots competed for individual glory, Davis instilled a strict discipline in his men. Their primary mission was bomber escort, and Davis made it clear that no pilot was to leave the bombers to chase enemy fighters, no matter how tempting the target. "Our mission is to protect those bombers," Davis told his pilots. "Not to rack up kills, not to seek personal glory, but to make sure those boys get home to their families. If we do that job well, everything else will follow." This philosophy contrasted sharply with that of many white fighter groups, where pilots often competed for ace status, 5 or more confirmed kills. Major Robert Diaries of the 99th Fighter Squadron explained it succinctly. "White pilots could afford to be cowboys. We couldn't. One failure would confirm every stereotype and might shut down the whole program." The discipline paid off. By February 1944, bomber crews were beginning to request the red tails as escorts, noting that they stayed close to the formations rather than charging off after enemy fighters. The distinctive red-painted tail sections of their P-47 Thunderbolts and later P-51 Mustangs became a welcome sight to bomber crews. Lieutenant Colonel William Campbell, a B-17 commander with the 15th Air Force, wrote in his mission report after a raid on Munich, "The Red Tail Boys stayed with us all the way. even when the flak was so thick you could walk on it. I'd fly with them any day. This reputation was solidified on March 24, 1944, during a massive raid on Berlin. The 332nd, now flying the superior P-51 Mustang, was assigned to escort the bomber formation. As they approached the target, the Luftwaffe rose to defend the Reich capital with over 100 fighters. Oberst Heinrich Weber, commanding Jagdgeschwader 7, recalled seeing the red-tailed Mustangs. We had intelligence that these were Negro pilots and initially thought this would be an easy day. That assessment proved catastrophically wrong. Weber's pilots attacked in force, expecting the Americans to break formation. Instead, the 332nd met them head-on while maintaining their escort positions. In the ensuing battle, the 332nd shot down 3 Messerschmitt Bf-109s without losing a single bomber, a remarkable achievement given the intensity of the German defense. Major Werner Schmidt, a Luftwaffe ace with 32 victories, found himself in a turning battle with Captain Wendell Pruitt of the 302nd Squadron. The American flew with unexpected skill, Schmidt later reported. I could not shake him from my tail, despite maneuvers that had worked against other Allied pilots. Schmidt only escaped by diving into a cloud bank, but his wingman wasn't so fortunate. Lieutenant Eric Butner's Bf-109 was hit by fire from Lieutenant Gwen Pearson and crashed near Oranienburg. The performance of the 332nd continued to improve as they gained combat experience. By June 1944, they had established a remarkable record. Not a single bomber under their escort had been lost to enemy fighters. This was a statistic unmatched by any other fighter group in the 15th Air Force. Colonel Davis enforced strict formation discipline and innovative tactics. The 332nd flew in a weaving pattern above the bombers, with a top cover flight positioned higher to intercept diving attackers. This defensive formation meant fewer opportunities for individual pilots to score kills by pursuing enemy fighters, but it resulted in exceptional bomber protection. Hauptmann Franz Stigler, a veteran Luftwaffe pilot with JG-27, expressed frustration in his combat diary. The Americans with red tail markings fly with unusual discipline. They refuse to be drawn away from their bombers, making our standard tactics ineffective. We must develop new approaches to deal with these formations. The Luftwaffe did adjust, instructing their pilots to make high-speed passes through bomber formations without engaging the escorts in prolonged dogfights. This led to some bomber losses, but also exposed German pilots to devastating fire from both bombers and fighters. On July 18, 1944, during a mission to Memmingen, Germany, the 332nd encountered a large formation of Messerschmitt Bf-109s. Despite being outnumbered, they shot down 11 enemy aircraft without losing a single bomber. First Lieutenant Lee Archer scored 3 kills that day, bringing his total to 5 and making him the first Tuskegee ace. Captain Joseph Ellsbury destroyed 3 enemy fighters in that same mission, a feat that earned him the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation read, "With extraordinary skill and courage, Captain Ellsbury protected his assigned bombers while simultaneously engaging multiple enemy aircraft, demonstrating combat proficiency of the highest order." By August 1944, the 332nd had destroyed 111 enemy aircraft in aerial combat. Their success was forcing a reassessment at the highest levels of the Army Air Forces. General Ira Eaker, commander of Mediterranean Allied Air Forces, who had once questioned the wisdom of allowing black pilots in combat, now praised the group's performance in official reports. The 332nd Fighter Group has proven itself in combat, Eaker wrote to General Henry Arnold, commanding general of the USAF. Their bomber escort record is unsurpassed, and their ability to perform all fighter missions is beyond question. Despite their growing reputation in the air, the Red Tails still faced discrimination on the ground. At Ramitelli Airfield in Italy, their base was separate from those of white units, with inferior facilities and supplies. Officers were barred from the officers' club at nearby bases, despite regulations prohibiting such segregation overseas. When Colonel Davis protested this treatment to theater command, he was told to focus on his combat duties and not cause trouble. Davis persisted, knowing that morale was as important as training. Eventually, under pressure from the War Department, which was itself under pressure from civil rights organizations, the segregated facilities policy was officially ended, though unofficial discrimination continued. First Lieutenant Wilson Eggleston described the contradiction in a letter home. In the air were United States fighter pilots, trusted with million-dollar aircraft and the lives of bomber crews. On the ground, we're just colored boys who need to remember our place. The irony wasn't lost on German prisoners of war, who were sometimes given privileges denied to black American officers. Captain Luther Smith recalled an incident at a railroad station in Italy. We were waiting for transportation, and right next to us were some German POWs being served coffee and donuts by the Red Cross. When we asked for the same, we were refused. Here were men who had been trying to kill us being treated better than we were. Through it all, the 332nd maintained its focus on the mission. By January 1945, they had flown more than 200 combat missions, escorted over 3,000 bombers, and destroyed or damaged more than 400 enemy aircraft on the ground and in the air. Their achievements were all the more remarkable given the obstacles they had overcome. Luftwaffe intelligence eventually identified the red-tailed aircraft as belonging to a Negro unit, but rather than dismissing them, German pilots were now warned to be cautious when engaging them. A Luftwaffe intelligence bulletin from February 1945 noted, "The American colored pilots fight with great determination and do not break off combat when confronted with superior numbers. Their bomber escort tactics are particularly effective." On March 24, 1945, the 332nd performed what many consider their most impressive mission. Assigned to escort B-17s to Berlin, a round trip of over 1,600 miles, the limit of the Mustang's range, they were confronted by one of the Luftwaffe's newest weapons, the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. With a top speed nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the P-51 Mustang, the Me-262 was designed to make devastating high-speed passes through bomber formations. The conventional tactic against such attacks was to anticipate the jet's approach path and position fighters accordingly, since the Me-262's high speed made it difficult to maneuver quickly. Major Roscoe Brown, commanding the 100th Fighter Squadron, had studied reports of the Me-262 and briefed his pilots on its capabilities. "They're faster, but they're not invincible," he told them. "Their high speed makes them overshoot in turns. If you can force them to maneuver, you have a chance." When the jets appeared, diving toward the bomber formation from 6,000 feet above, Brown and his wingman, Lieutenant Charles Brantley, climbed to intercept. Brown later recalled, "I knew I couldn't catch him in a straight chase, so I had to predict where he'd be. I climbed at an angle that would intersect his path after he attacked the bombers." The German pilot, Oberleutnant Hans Freilinghaus of Jägerschwader 7, was focused on the bombers and didn't notice Brown's Mustang until too late. As Freilinghaus pulled up from his attack run, Brown fired a burst that struck the Me-262's right engine, sending it into a spin. The jet exploded when it hit the ground, making Brown one of the first Allied pilots to shoot down a jet in combat. 2 more Me-262s were damaged by the 332nd that day, and not a single bomber was lost. Major Werner Schroer, a Luftwaffe ace with 114 victories who witnessed the engagement, later told Allied interrogators, "We had been told the Negro pilots were inferior, but those red tails were some of the best I encountered. Their discipline under fire was remarkable." The success of the 332nd Fighter Group had implications far beyond the European theater. Back in the United States, news of their achievements was challenging long-held assumptions about racial capabilities. The Pittsburgh Courier, which had championed the Tuskegee program from the beginning, ran the headline, "Red Tails Proving Negro Aviators Second to None," after the Berlin mission. Even the mainstream white press began to cover their exploits. Time magazine featured a story on the group in April 1945, noting that they had compiled a combat record that neatly refutes the notion that Negroes can't make good fighter pilots. By the end of the war, the 332nd Fighter Group had flown 1,578 missions, destroyed 112 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, and damaged another 150 on the ground. Perhaps most impressively, They had lost only 27 bombers to enemy fighters, the lowest loss rate of any escort group in the 15th Air Force. The group was awarded 3 Distinguished Unit citations, and its pilots earned 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses. One particularly remarkable mission took place on June 9, 1944. The 332nd was escorting B-24 Liberators to bomb an oil refinery at Ploiești, Romania, one of the most heavily defended targets in Europe. The refinery supplied 35% of all petroleum products used by the German military, making it a critical strategic target. Previous bombing missions to Ploiești had suffered catastrophic losses, with some raids losing up to 30% of their bomber force. Lieutenant James Harvey of the 99th Fighter Squadron recalled the mission briefing. Colonel Davis made it crystal clear. Your job is to protect those bombers, period. I don't care if the entire Luftwaffe is up there, you stick with your bombers. As the formation approached the target, they encountered intense anti-aircraft fire. Major William Campbell, a B-24 pilot with the 461st Bomb Group, later wrote, "The flak was so thick you could almost step out of your aircraft and walk on it. I've never seen anything like it." Simultaneously, a formation of 20 Messerschmitt Bf-109s appeared and began setting up for an attack on the vulnerable bombers. The standard Luftwaffe tactic was to approach from the front in a head-on pass, forcing the bomber formation to break apart, then pick off the isolated aircraft. Lieutenant Harold Sawyer of the 302nd Fighter Squadron spotted the German fighters and radioed, "Red Tails, we've got company at 2 o'clock high. They're setting up for a frontal attack." Colonel Davis immediately ordered an aggressive response. "All flights, move to intercept. Don't let them near the bombers." The Red Tails broke formation and climbed to meet the attacking fighters before they could reach the bombers. In the ensuing battle, they shot down 8 enemy aircraft without losing a single P-51 or bomber. Major Joseph Priller, a Luftwaffe ace with 101 victories who participated in the attack, later told Allied interrogators, "We were shocked by the aggressiveness of the American colored pilots. They fought like wildcats, completely contrary to what our intelligence had told us to expect." Their success was all the more remarkable given the technical specifications of the aircraft involved. The P-51D Mustang, which the 332nd had transitioned to in July 1944, had a top speed of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, powered by a Packard V1650-7 engine producing 1,490 horsepower. With a service ceiling of 41,900 feet and a range of 1,650 miles with drop tanks, it was perfectly suited to long-range escort missions. The 6.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns provided devastating firepower, capable of firing 2,400 rounds per minute. In comparison, the Messerschmitt Bf-109G, the most common variant encountered in 1944, had a top speed of 387 miles per hour at 23,000 feet, powered by a Daimler-Benz DB605A engine producing 1,475 horsepower. With a service ceiling of 38,500 feet and a range of only 620 miles, it was at a significant disadvantage in extended engagements. Its armament consisted of one 20mm cannon firing through the propeller hub and 2 13mm machine guns mounted on the engine cowling. These technical differences, combined with the Red Tails' tactical discipline, gave the 332nd a decisive edge in combat. As Lieutenant Roger Romine noted in his combat journal, "The 109 could outturn us in a close-in dogfight, but our superior speed and dive capabilities meant we could dictate the terms of engagement. If we maintained our energy and avoided getting sucked into turning contests, we could hit them and then get away before they could respond." By August 1944, the 332nd had established such a formidable reputation that German pilots were specifically briefed on the red-tailed Mustangs before missions. A captured Luftwaffe intelligence document stated, "The American Negro pilots fly with unusual aggression and maintain exceptional formation discipline. Standard tactics are often ineffective against them. Recommend avoiding engagement when they are escorting bomber formations unless a significant numerical advantage can be achieved." The technical prowess of the 332nd was not limited to aerial combat. Their ground crews, also all Negro personnel, maintained some of the highest aircraft serviceability rates in the 15th Air Force, despite often receiving lower priority for spare parts and equipment. Technical Sergeant Lawrence McKenzie, a crew chief with the 100th Fighter Squadron, developed an innovative method for reducing oil consumption in the Mustang's Merlin engine, extending the operational range by nearly 50 miles. His technique was eventually adopted throughout the 15th Air Force, saving thousands of gallons of oil per month and allowing bombers to reach targets deeper in enemy territory. The war's end brought new challenges. Despite their distinguished service, the Tuskegee Airmen returned to a segregated America. Captain Lawrence Brooks found this particularly bitter. After landing at New York's LaGuardia Airport in July 1945, he entered the terminal and was immediately directed to the colored waiting area. "I had just spent 2 years fighting for freedom," Brooks later recalled, "only to find I still didn't have it at home." Yet the achievements of the 332nd had set in motion changes that would ultimately transform both the military and American society. In 1947, under pressure from civil rights leaders who pointed to the Tuskegee Airmen as proof that segregation was both unjust and inefficient, President Truman issued Executive Order 9981, declaring equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. Within 6 months, those same resistant pilots were requesting to be assigned to missions with the former Tuskegee Airmen, having witnessed their exceptional skill and discipline. Major Harold Sawyer explained, "Excellence is the most powerful weapon against prejudice. Once they saw what we could do in the air, the color barriers started to break down." This process repeated itself at bases across America and eventually in combat over Korea, where several Tuskegee veterans distinguished themselves in the jet age. Captain Daniel "Chappie" James Jr., who would later become America's first black four-star general, flew 101 combat missions in Korea and emerged as one of the Air Force's most respected fighter pilots. The technical transition from propeller-driven P-51s to jets presented challenges for all pilots, but the Tuskegee veterans adapted quickly. The North American F-86 Sabre, America's primary jet fighter in Korea, had a top speed of 687 miles per hour at sea level, more than 250 miles per hour faster than the P-51 Mustang. Its J-47 GE 27 turbojet engine produced 5,910 pounds of thrust, allowing it to climb at a rate of 9,000 feet per minute. Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. noted in a 1951 report, "The men who flew with the 332nd have demonstrated exceptional ability to master new aircraft and technologies. Their experience overcoming adversity during World War II prepared them uniquely for the challenges of the jet age." Oberst Weber, the Luftwaffe commander who had initially dismissed the Red Tails, visited the United States in 1952 as part of a NATO exchange program. When asked about his wartime experiences, he remarked, "The greatest mistake we made was underestimating the American Negro pilots. They fought with a discipline and effectiveness that was truly formidable. Perhaps if we had learned about prejudice earlier, we might have lost the war later." Colonel Davis, who had led the 332nd through its most challenging days, rose to become the first black general in the United States Air Force. Reflecting on the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen in 1968, he said, "We didn't just prove that Negro pilots could fly combat aircraft. We proved that if you give any American the proper training and opportunity, they can perform as well as anyone else." The achievements of the Tuskegee Airmen carried a powerful message that extended far beyond military aviation. They had demonstrated not just courage in combat, but extraordinary resilience in the face of discrimination. In doing so, they helped set the stage for the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, providing a powerful example of black excellence that contradicted the foundations of segregation. Major Coleman Young, who went from Tuskegee cadet to become Detroit's first black mayor, often cited his experience with the program. "Tuskegee taught us that the only limits were those others placed on us, and those we could overcome." The legacy of the 332nd Fighter Group, the Red Tails, remains one of World War II's most powerful stories of courage, skill, determination, heroism, and sacrifice against overwhelming odds and systemic discrimination. From the Luftwaffe pilots who initially laughed at them to the bomber crews who specifically requested their escort, the journey of the Tuskegee Airmen represents a triumph not just of military aviation but of the human spirit. The pilots who served with the 332nd demonstrated that excellence knows no color barrier. In doing so, they not only contributed significantly to Allied victory in World War II, but also struck a powerful blow against segregation and discrimination, paving the way for the integration of the armed forces and the broader civil rights movement that would follow. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.